Good afternoon, football fans. Big Al here on this Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. And welcome to another edition of The Week That Was, where we take a look at every game from week number 9 in the National Football League. Now, I'm going to do this in two parts. And this is going to take place going forward, starting today. All right, so in part 2, which will be my next video, we'll be taking a look at the late games, the Sunday night and Monday night games, plus my Week 10 power rankings, the updated standings going into Week 10, and the playoff races, because it's getting to that point where we're starting to talk postseason. That's coming up in my next video in part 2. Here in part 1, we'll be looking at the Thursday night game, the Dolphins Chiefs game from Frankfurt, and the early games from Sunday. All right. So at that, we're going to start off with Thursday night football as always. And this week, the Pittsburgh Steelers defeated the Tennessee Titans by a final score of 20-16. Looking at individual numbers for the Pittsburgh Steelers, first off, Kenny Pickett went 19 of 30 for 160 yards and a touchdown and an 88.2 passer rating. He did run once, though, for -1 yard. Okay, Jaylen Warren led the Steelers in rushing with 11 carries for 88 yards. Najee Harris, meanwhile, had 16 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown. Warren also caught 3 passes for 25 yards on 3 targets, and Harris caught a couple for 7 on 4 targets. The leading receiver for the Steelers was Deontay Johnson, 7 receptions, 90 yards, and a touchdown on 9 targets, averaging nearly 13 yards per catch. Hayward had 2 catches for 16 yards on 3 targets. And George Pickens held to -1 yard on 2 targets, or rather 2 catches on 5 targets. Chris Boswell was 2 for 2 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. Harvin had 4 punts averaging 50 yards, his longest was 62 yards. 3 of his 4 punts went inside the 20. Okay. Leading tacklers were Roberts with 4. Casey Hayward also had 4. Keanu Neal had 3. Patrick Peterson had 3 tackles and a pass defense, as did Joey Porter Jr. TJ Watt had 2 tackles and a sack. Alex Highsmith, meanwhile, had 2 tackles and 2 sacks. Alexander adds an interception for the Steelers. And for the Tennessee Titans, Will Levis, who has been named the starter for the Titans for the rest of 2023, was 22 of 39 for 262 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. His quarterback rating was 66.4. Levis ran once as well for 2 yards. Leading rusher was Derrick Henry with 17 carries and 75 yards, plus a touchdown. King Henry also had 3 receptions for 27 on 4 targets. The leading receivers for Tennessee were Kenny Phillips. I think that's Kenny Phillips. We'll look, though. Kyle Phillips. He had 4 receptions for 68 yards on 5 targets, averaged 17 yards a catch. DeAndre Hopkins had 4 catches for 60 yards on 11 targets, averaged 15 yards a catch. Nick Folk, 3 for 3 on field goals and 1 for 1 on extra points. Ryan Stonehouse had 3 punts, averaging 57 yards. His long was 61, and all 3 punts were inside the 20-yard line. Hooker led the Titans defense with 6 tackles. Both Simmons and Gibbons had 4, as did Fulton. He had 4 tackles and a pass defense. Al-Shahir had 2 tackles and a pass defense for this Tennessee defense. And it looks like not a 1 sack to be had by Tennessee in this game. All right, looking at team numbers. All right, total yards were 340 for the Titans and 326 for the Steelers. Passing yards favored Tennessee, 235 to 160. Rushing yards were 166 to 105 in favor of the Steelers. Tennessee had 23 first downs to Pittsburgh's 22. The Steelers were 6 for 12 on third down, 0 for 0 on fourth down. Tennessee was 3 of 13 on third down and 1 of 2 on fourth down. The Titans had 7 penalties for 51 yards, while the Steelers had 10 for 80. All right, 4 sacks against the Titans, 1 interception and 3 punts. And for the Steelers, no sacks and 4 punts. Okay. Closing line in this game was Pittsburgh -3, and the over-under was 37. I picked the Titans, however, to win this game, and I took them plus the 3 points. I'll tell you how I fared on my picks later on in part 2, so stay tuned for that. Moving on to the first of 2 Frankfurt games this season, the Kansas City Chiefs, reigning Super Bowl champions, took down the Miami Dolphins by a final score of 21-14. Oh, and as for records, the Steelers are now 5-3, and the Titans are 3-5. Here, the Kansas City Chiefs moved to an AFC best 7-2, while the Miami Dolphins dropped to 6-3. So let's take a look at the Chiefs' individual leaders first off. All right, Patrick Mahomes, 20 of 30 for 185 yards with 2 touchdowns and no interceptions, quarterback rating of 105.6. Mahomes also ran 6 times for 24 yards. Leading rusher was Isaiah Pacheco, 16 rushes, 66 yards. Okay. Leading receiver was Gray, 3 receptions on 3 targets for 34 yards. Sky Moore had 2 catches for 33 on 3 targets. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, 2 catches, 22 yards on 3 targets. McKinnon, 2 catches, 22 yards and a touchdown. Rice also had a touchdown, 2 catches and 17 yards on 2 targets. Missing in action in this game, though, was Travis Kelce, held to 3 catches on 14, or 3 catches for 14 yards on 4 targets. And McCole Hartman, 3 catches for 10 yards on 3 targets. Harrison Butker, no field goals attempted, 3 for 3 on field goals. Tommy Townsend, 6 punts averaging 50.3 yards. His longest punt was 68. He had 1 touchback and 2 punts inside the 20-yard line. McDuffie was the leading tackler for Kansas City. He had 8 tackles and a forced fumble. Chanel had 4 tackles and a sack. Drew Tranquil, 4 tackles. Willie gave 4 tackles and a forced fumble. And Watt had 3 tackles and 1 sack. For the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa, 21 of 34 for 193 yards, 1 touchdown and no interceptions. He had an 87 quarterback rating. Tua also ran twice for 7 yards. Raheem Mostert was Kansas City's leading rusher. 12 attempts for 85 yards and a touchdown. And then moving to the receiving numbers, Tyreek Hill had 8 catches for 62 yards on 10 targets, averaged just under 8 yards per catch. Jalen Waddle, 3 for 42 on 6 targets, averaging 14 catch. Cedric Wilson would score a receiving touchdown for Miami. His 1 catch went for 31 yards in that score. He was targeted 5 times. Okay, Sanders had no field goals attempted, 2 for 2 on extra points. Bailey had 7 punts, averaging 45.1 yards per punt. His longest was 52. 4 of his punts landed inside the 20-yard line. All right. Siler, Ramsey, and Kohu paced the Dolphins defense with 4 tackles. Kohu also had a pass defense. Bradley Chubb, meanwhile, had 2 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, and a pass defense. Van Ginkel had 2 tackles, as did Holland and Phillips. Phillips added a sack in this game as well. Okay. Total yards, 292 for Miami, 267 for Kansas City. Passing yards, 175 to 174 for the Dolphins. Rushing yards also favored Miami, 117 to 93, as did first downs. The Dolphins had 20 first downs. The Chiefs had 16. The Chiefs finished 3 of 10 on third down, while the Dolphins were 3 for 12. Miami was 0 for 1 on fourth down. No fourth down plays for the Chiefs. Miami had 6 penalties for 45 yards. Kansas City 9 for 69. The Dolphins sacked 3 times, losing 18 yards with 1 fumble loss and 7 punts. The Chiefs were sacked twice, losing 11 yards with a fumble loss and 6 punts. Okay, closing line ended up being Miami -1, and the over-under was at 51.5. I took the Dolphins when they were underdogs at +1. That was my straight-up pick, and I also took them minus that 1 point. Kansas City outright covers and wins straight up. Okay, that brings us to the Sunday afternoon portion of the schedule. We'll start off with the Cleveland Browns shutting out the hapless Arizona Cardinals by a final of 27-0. All right, looking at individual numbers for the Cleveland Browns. Deshaun, 19 of 30 for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no INTs. Quarterback rating was 107.5. Watson also ran 3 times for 22 yards. All right, leading rusher was Jack Ford, 20 for 44 yards. He also caught 5 passes on 7 targets for 33 yards, averaging 6.6 yards per catch. Kareem Hunt had 14 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown. Leading receiver was Amari Cooper. 5 receptions, 139 yards, and a touchdown. He averaged nearly 28 yards a catch, and he was targeted 5 times. David Njoku, 4 catches, 26 yards, and a touchdown on 6 targets. Okay. Hopkins went 2 for 3 on field goals and 3 for 3 on extra points. Corey Bajorquez averaging 58.6 yards. His long punt was 93, very impressive. Couple touchbacks and a couple punts inside the 20-yard line. Leading tackler was Delpit. He had 8 tackles and half a sack. Owosu Koromoa had 3 tackles. Mitchell, 3 tackles and a pass defense. Zadarius Smith had 3 tackles and a sack. Harris, 3 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, and a pass defense. Tomlinson, 2 tackles and 2.5 sacks. Denzel Ward had 2 tackles, 2 passes defense, and an interception. Taki also had an interception for this Cleveland defense. For the Cardinals, and there's not much to talk about here, Clayton Tune, the rookie quarterback, made his first NFL start, and it wasn't great. 11 of 20 for 58 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, which equals out to a quarterback rating of 20.8. Tune was also the Cardinals' leading rusher, 5 carries for 28 yards. No other Cardinals rusher in this game had more than 8 yards. Marquise Hollywood Brown was the leading receiver for Arizona. 4 catches for 24 yards on 8 targets, averaged 6 yards a catch. Trey McBride, second-year tight end. 3 receptions, 22 yards on 5 targets, averaging 7.3 yards per catch. Gillikin had 9 punts in this game, averaging 51.1 yards per punt. His longest was 58 yards, and 2 of his 9 punts landed inside the 20-yard line. Strong and Thompson led the Cardinals defense with 5 tackles apiece. Baker and Ojulari had 4 tackles. Fotu had 3 tackles and half a sack. Woods had 2 tackles and half a sack for this Cards defense. All right, looking at total yards, 326 for the Cleveland Browns, only 58 for the Arizona Cardinals. Passing and rushing both favored the Browns. 213 yards through the air for Cleveland versus 17 for the Cardinals. And rushing-wise, the Browns had 113 yards, while Arizona had 41. 17 first downs for Cleveland and 7 for Arizona. 6 penalties, 65 yards for the Browns. They had 1 sack and 7 punts. They ended up being sacked once, losing 6 yards and 7 punts. And the Cardinals had 4 penalties for 40 yards. They were sacked 7 times, losing 41 yards, with 1 fumble loss, 2 interceptions thrown, and 9 punts. All right, closing line was Cleveland minus 13. The over-under is 37.5. Okay. What's going on here? There it is. Okay, and the closing line was Cleveland minus 13, really. And the over-under was 37.5. I took the Browns both straight up and against the spread in this game. Next up, the Chicago. Cleveland improves to 5-3 with the win, while the Cardinals are now an NFL worst 1-8. And they have lost, I think, 6 straight games now. All right, our next game is the Chicago Bears at the New Orleans Saints. It was a lot closer for the Saints than they wanted it to be, but New Orleans ends up winning this one by a final of 24-17. Looking at individual numbers for the Saints, Derek Carr, 25 of 34, 211 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, quarterback rating of 108.8. Taysom Hill, 1 for 1 for 3 yards and a touchdown, and a 118.8 quarterback rating. Hill was the leading rusher for the Saints, 11 carries, 52 yards. Carr ran 3 times for 3 yards. Alvin Kamara, 9 rushes, 20 yards. Leading receiver for New Orleans, Chris Olave, 6 catches, 46 yards, and a touchdown on 8 targets. Kamara caught 4 passes for 44 on 5 targets. Johnson, 5 catches, 29 yards on 5 targets, and a touchdown. Taysom Hill also caught a receiving TD in this game. He had 4 receptions for 13 on 5 targets. Okay, Group B, 1 for 2 on field goals, 3 for 3 on extra points. Headley had 4 punts, averaging 41 yards. His longest was 48, 3 of his punts inside the 20. Leading tackler was Davis with 8 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble. Adebo, 5 tackles and a forced fumble. Tyrann Mathieu, the Honeyback, had 5 tackles and a pass defense. Granderson, 4 tackles. Cameron Jordan, 3 tackles and a sack. May had 3 tackles, 1 pass defense, and 1 interception for the Saints D. Moving over to the Chicago Bears, Tyson Bagent, 18 of 30 for 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, 65.3 passer rating. Bagent also ran 8 times for 70 yards. Leading rusher was Foreman, 20 rushes, 83 yards. Darnell Mooney led the Chicago receivers with 5 catches on 6 targets for 82 yards. But it was the tight end Cole Kmet who had a big game. 6 catches, 55 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. DJ Moore, 3 catches for 44 on 5 targets. All right. Cairo Santos, 1 for 2 on field goals, 2 for 2 on extra points. And Gill had 2 punts, averaged 47.5 yards. His longest was 49. Tremaine Edwards, the ex-Buffalo Bill, led the Chicago defense with 10 tackles, a pass defense. Sanborn had 8 tackles. Jackson had 5 tackles. Hicks, Gordon, Johnson, and newly acquired Montez Sweat had 2 tackles, or rather, Hicks, Gordon, and Johnson each had 3 tackles. Montez Sweat in his Chicago Bears debut had 2 tackles and a pass defense. All right. Here we go. All right, total yards 368 for the Bears and 301 for the Saints. Passing yards were 214 for New Orleans, 212 for Chicago. Rushing yards favored the Bears by a wide margin, 156 to 87. As for first downs, the Bears had 20 while the Saints had 18. The Bears finished 6 of 12 on third down, 1 for 1 on fourth down. Saints were 7 of 14 on third down and 0 for 1 on fourth down. Chicago had 8 penalties for 71 yards. They were sacked twice, losing 8 yards, with 2 lost fumbles, 3 interceptions, and 2 punts. The Saints only 1 penalty for 5 yards and 4 punts. Closing line was New Orleans -9, and the over-under was 42. I picked the Bears, I picked the Saints, both straight up and against the spread in this one. Okay, moving on to the Los Angeles Rams and the Green Bay Packers. LA looking for their first win in Green Bay since 2005, while they'll have to wait a little while longer as the Packers win this one 20-3. All right, looking at individual numbers for the Packers. Jordan Love, 20 of 26, 228 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Solid quarterback rating of 115.5. Love also ran 4 times for 7 yards. Aaron Jones was the leading rusher for the Pack, 20 rushes, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Wilson had 4 carries for 43. A.J. Dillon, 9 carries for 40. All right, leading receiver for the Packers is Luke Musgrave. 3 catches on 4 targets for 51 yards and a touchdown. Wicks, 4 catches, 49 yards on 4 tackles, or rather 4 targets. Watson had 1 catch on 2 targets, and that 1 catch went for 37. Romeo Doubs, 3 receptions, 36 yards on 3 targets. Aaron Jones, 4 catches, 26 yards on 6 targets. Went too far. Okay. Anders Carlson, 2 for 3 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. Whelan, 4 punts, averaging 43.5 yards. Longest is 52, with 1 punt inside the 20-yard line. Jair Alexander led the Packers defense with 7 tackles and 2 passes defense. McDuffie, 6 tackles. Owens, 5 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble. Nixon, 5 tackles. And Campbell with 3 tackles. For the Los Angeles Rams, this I think is their 3rd string quarterback, Brett Rippon. Right. 13 of 28 for 130 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 45.2 passer rating. 3 rushes for 19 yards. He was immediately released by the Rams, who then in turn signed journeyman quarterback Carson Wentz. As again, Stafford is still on the shelf. All right, leading rusher was Freeman, 12 rushes, 32 yards. Leading receiver was Cooper Kupp, catches 48 yards on 7 targets, averaged 24 yards a catch. Puka Nacua, 3 catches, 32 yards on 7 targets, averaged about 11 yards a catch. Henderson, 2 for 16 on 2 targets. All right. Havrisik, 1 for 2 on field goals and 0 for 0 on extra points. Evans, 5 punts, averaged 44.8 yards per. Longest punt was 65, 2 punts inside the 20-yard line. All right. Young paced the LA defense with 8 tackles, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble. Turner, 7 tackles and a sack. Lake, 5 tackles. Yeast, 4 tackles. Shelley, 4 tackles. Fuller, 3 tackles and a forced. And Witherspoon, 3 tackles and a pass defense for the LA Rams. Okay, total yards, 391 for the Packers, 187 for the Rams. Passing yards, 207 to 119. And rushing yards, 184 to 68, both in favor of Green Bay. They had twice the first downs as the Rams, 21 for Green Bay, 10 for LA. The Packers finished 7 of 14 on 3rd down and 1 for 1 on 4th down, while LA finished 5 of 14 on 3rd down and 0 for 2 on 4th down. The Packers had 8 penalties for 57 yards, sacked 4 times, losing 21 yards in the process, with a couple fumbles lost and 4 punts. The LA Rams, meanwhile, had 5 penalties for 36 yards, sacked once for 11, with 1 lost fumble, 1 interception, and 5 punts. Closing line in this game was Green Bay -4, and the over-under was at 37.5. I took the Packers both straight up and against the spread. Up next, you got the Minnesota Vikings at the Atlanta Falcons. Of course, it's been a tough week for the Vikings, losing their field general quarterback Kirk Cousins for the season with an Achilles injury. So they traded with the Cardinals for quarterback Josh Dobbs, and he would lead them on a last-second touchdown drive to knock off the Falcons in Atlanta by a final of 31-28. Dobbs in his Minnesota debut went 20 of 30 for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns and a 101.8 passer rating. Okay. Dobbs ran 7 times for 66 yards and a rushing touchdown, as he was Minnesota's leading rusher. Hall with 5 for 6 for 78 and a 118.8 rating. Ran twice for 11. Matheson, 16 carries, 44 yards. Cam Akers, 8 carries for 25. Leading receiver for the Vikings was TJ Hawkinson, 7 receptions, 69 yards on 12 targets. Matheson, 2 catches, 49 yards, 2 targets, and a touchdown. Powell also caught a TD for Minnesota. Greg Joseph, 3 of 3 on field goals, 2 for 2 on extra points. Wright had 3 punts, averaged 44 yards. His longest was 52, with 1 punt inside the 20. Jordan Hicks paced the Vikings defense with 9 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 pass defense. Danielle Hunter had 5 tackles. Evans had 5 tackles and a forced fumble. Harrison Smith had 3 tackles, as did Metellus. Pt.1 had 3 tackles. Byron Murphy, another ex-Cardinal, he had 3 tackles, 2 passes defense, and an interception. interception. For the Atlanta Falcons, Taylor Heineke, 21 of 38 for 200 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. His quarterback rating was 75.3. Heineke also ran 3 times for 20 yards. Leading rusher for Atlanta is the rookie Bijan Robinson, 11 carries for 51 yards. Tyler Algier, 12 carries, 39 yards, and a score. Leading receiver is Jonnu Smith, the tight end, at 5 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets. Hodge, 3 catches, 6 yards on 6 targets. Kyle Pitts, 4 catches, 56 yards on 5 targets. Hollins, 3 catches, 36 yards on 3 targets. And Van Jefferson at 1 catch on 4 targets for 14 yards. Younghoe Koo, 4 for 4 on field goals, 2 for 2 on extra points. Longest was 54 yards. That's his longest field goal. Pinion had 4 punts, averaged 43.8 yards per punt. His longest was 46, with 1 touchback and 2 punts inside the 20-yard line. Okay. Landman, Onyemata, Ellis, and Bates all have 5 tackles for the Atlanta defense. Landman had a sack and a pass defense in addition to his 5 tackles. Onyemata had a sack and a forced fumble with his 5 tackles, while both Ellis and Bates had 1 pass defense. Grant had 4 tackles and 2 passes defense. And Fukuda had 4 tackles and 1 pass defense. All right. Total yards, very close to each other. 370 yards for Atlanta, 363 for Minnesota. Passing yards favored the Atlanta Falcons in this. 260 for the Falcons versus 217 for the Vikings. Minnesota had the edge in rushing, though, 146 yards on the ground versus 110 for the Falcons. Minnesota had 23 first downs versus Atlanta's 18. The Vikings, 7 of 16 on 3rd downs, 1 for 1 on 4th down. The Falcons, a very impressive 10 of 18 on 3rd down, and no 4th down plays. The Vikings had just 1 penalty for 4 yards. They were sacked 4 times, losing 19, with a couple fumbles lost and 3 punts. The Atlanta Falcons had 8 penalties for 62 yards. They were sacked once for 8 yards, with 1 lost fumble, 1 interception, and 4 punts. Closing line in this game was at Atlanta minus 3.5, and the over-under was at 39. I took the Falcons both straight up and against the spread and lost both picks. Okay, moving on to the Seattle Seahawks and Baltimore Ravens. And the story in this game was Baltimore's ground game, as they pummeled the Seahawks by a final of 37-3. All right, taking a look at individual numbers for the hometown Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson, 21 of 26 for 187 yards with no touchdowns or interceptions, 96.6 quarterback rating, 10 rushes for 60 yards. Todd Hundley, who came in garbage time, went 5 for 7 for 38 yards and a touchdown and a 123.8 passer rating, 4 rushes for 8 yards. Leading rusher for Baltimore is a young man by the name of Keaton Mitchell, putting up career numbers for this Ravens offense. 9 carries for 138 and a touchdown. I mentioned Lamar Jackson's rushing numbers, 10 for 60. Gus Edwards added 5 rushes for 52 and 2 TDs. Leading receiver for the Ravens was Mark Andrews. 9 catches, 80 yards on 10 targets, averaged close to 9 yards a catch. Odell Beckham Jr., 5 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown on 7 targets, averaged over 11 yards a catch. Isaiah Likely, 4 catches, 42 yards on 4 targets. Rashad Bateman, 3 catches, 28 yards on 5 targets. And Zay Flowers with just 1 catch on his 1 target for 11 yards. Missing in action in this game were Devin Duvernay, 2 catches, 10 yards on 2 targets. And Nelson Aguilar, 1 catch for 2 yards on 1 target. Looking at kicking. Justin Tucker, 3 for 3 on field goals, 4 for 4 on extra points. Stout had 2 punts, averaging 56.5 yards. Longest punt was 66. Leading tacklers for the Ravens were Patrick Queen with 5 tackles, Matt Abuke with 4 tackles and a sack, Smith with 3 tackles, Jadeveon Clowney, 2 tackles and 2 passes defensed, Kyle Hamilton, 2 tackles and 1 pass defense for the Baltimore Ravens. Switching the card over to the Seahawks, Geno Smith, not his best game at all. 13-28 for 157 yards. No touchdowns, 1 interception. His quarterback rating was 49.3. Ran twice for just 4 yards. Leading rusher was Kenneth Walker III, 9 for 16 yards. Zach Charbonnet, rookie running back from UCLA, 4 carries for 8 yards. Leading receiver for the Seahawks, another rookie, Jackson Smith-Njigba. 6 catches, 63 yards on 7 targets. DK Metcalf targeted 4 times, made only 1 catch, but it was a big one. It went for 50. And Tyler Lockett, 3 catches for 32 yards on 8 targets. Didn't hear from the... Okay. Myers was 1 for 1 on field goals with no extra points. His only field goal made was from 33. Michael Dixon, 7 punts, averaged 45.7 yards. His longest was 60. 3 of his punts inside the 20-yard line. Okay, Brooks led the Seattle defense with 9 tackles and a pass defense. Bobby Wagner, 6 tackles. Woolen, 6 tackles. Mafe, 5 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble. Quandre Diggs, 5 tackles. Witherspoon had 5 tackles and a pass defense for this Seahawks defense. Okay, total yards, 515 for the Ravens, only 151 for the Seahawks. Passing and rushing both favored Baltimore. 217 passing yards to 123. But the rushing game was the story in this one. 298 yards for Baltimore, only 28 for Seattle. First downs, nearly a 5-1 clip to Baltimore. They had 29 first downs while the Seahawks had 6. The Ravens had 3 penalties for 11 yards, sacked once for 8 yards, 2 lost fumbles, no interceptions, and 2 hits. The Seahawks had 5 penalties for 29 yards. They were sacked 4 times, losing 34 yards, with 1 fumble lost, 1 interception, and 7 punts. Closing line was Baltimore -6. Over-under was 44.5. I took the Ravens both straight up against the spread. Next up, we got probably the finish of the day. The Houston Texans and their rookie quarterback setting records in a 39-37 victory over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we're going to look at the Texans individual numbers first. Listen to this stat line on CJ Stroud. 30 of 42 for 470 yards, which is an NFL single-game rookie record, with 5 touchdowns and interceptions, and a near-perfect QB rating of 147.8. Stroud also had a rush in this game for 11 yards. Leading rusher was Devin Singletary, 13 for 26. Leading receiver was Brown. In fact, they had 3 receivers over 100 yards receiving, and they each found the end zone at least once. Hey, it's Tommy. What's up, Tommy? All right, Brown had 6 catches for 153 yards on 6 targets with a touchdown, averaged 25.5 yards per catch. Dalton Schultz, 10 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown on 11 targets, averaged 13 per catch. Tank Dell, 6 catches, 114, and 2 scores on 11 targets. He, of course, was the one that scored the game-winning touchdown. Nico Collins, former Michigan Wolverine, go blue, 3 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown on 5 targets. All right. Fairbairn went 1 for 1 on field goals, 1 for 1 on extra points. Ogunbowale, 1 for 1 on field goals and no extra points. All right. Johnston, 3 punts, 58-yard average. Long was 62. All right. Thomas led the Texans defense with 7 tackles and a forced fumble. Cashman, 5 tackles. Petrie, 4 tackles and a pass defense. Harris, same thing, 4 tackles and a pass defense. Perryman, Nelson, and Hughes each had 3 tackles. Over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield, or as Mitch Maloney from the Bottom Line View calls him, Baker the commercial maker. By the way, subscribe to the Bottom Line View. Best NFL content on YouTube, bar none. Anyway, Baker the commercial maker was 21 of 30 for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns with no interceptions. And he had a respectable QB rating of 119. Mayfield ran 4 times for 4 yards. Rusher was White, 20 for 73 and 2 touchdowns. Mike Evans was the leading receiver for the Bucs. 4 catches, 87 yards on 5 targets, averaged nearly 22 yards a catch. Cade Otton, 6 catches, 70 yards, 2 scores on 9 targets. Palmer, 3 catches, 51 on 4 targets. White had 4 catches on 4 targets for 46. Chris Godwin limited to 2 catches on 6 targets for 16 yards. McLaughlin, 3 for 3 on long was 55, and 4 for 4 on extra points. Camarda, 4 punts, averaged 50.5 yards. Longest was 53. 2 punts inside the 20-yard line. Levante did pace the Tampa Bay defense with 9 tackles and 1 forced fumble. White and McCollum each had 5 tackles. White had a sack. McCollum also had a pass defense. Vita Vea, 4 tackles. Cansey, 4 tackles and a sack. Davis, 3 tackles, and Barrett, that's Shaq Barrett, 3 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, total yards. If my cooperate with me, there we go. 496 yards of offense for the Texans versus 332 for the Buccaneers. Passing yards, 443 for Houston, 251 for Tampa. Rushing yards would favor the visiting team, 81 for the Bucs, 53 for the Texans. 26 first downs for Houston, 21 for Tampa. Both teams had 9 penalties in this game. The Bucs had 9 for 90 yards. They were sacked twice, losing 14, with 1 lost fumble and 4 punts. The Texans were flagged 9 times for 115. They were sacked 3 times, losing 27 yards with 3 punts. Closing line in this game was Houston minus 2.5, and the over-under was 40. And both teams nearly reached that total individually by themselves. That's what I was trying to say. Texans came within 1 point of that Vegas over-under. The Bucs came within 3 points. I picked Houston both straight up and against the spread, and I'm glad I did. All right, the final game we'll look at here in part 1 is the Washington Commanders defeating the New England Patriots 20-17. So the Commanders traded Chase Young to the 49ers and Montez Sweat to the Bears, and their defense performed real well on Sunday. We'll look at the individual numbers first up for the Washington Commanders. Sam Howell, 29 of 45 for 325 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, quarterback rating of 84. Howell also ran 5 times for 27 yards. Robinson had 18 rushes for 63 and a touchdown. Gibson, 6 carries for 34 yards. Leading receiver for Washington is who else but scary Terry McLaurin. 5 catches, 73 yards on 7 targets, averaged 14.6 yards per catch. Jahan Dotson, 4 catches, 69 yards and a touchdown on 8 targets. Byron Pringle, 3 catches, 55 yards on 4 targets, averaged 8.3. Antonio Gibson, 5 for 42 on 5 targets. He averaged about 8 yards per catch. Brown, 2 for 33 on 4 targets. Thomas, 31 on 6 targets. And Crowder, 4 for 23 on 6 targets. About that, guys. Okay, Joey Sly, 2 for 2 on field goals, 2 for 2 on extra points. And Tress Way, 5 punts, averaging 47.8 yards a punt. His longest was 64, with 1 touchback and 4 punts inside the 20-yard line. Okay, moving on to the Washington defense. Leading tackler was Kyle Fuller with 5. Davis had 4 tackles and a pass defense. Cameron Curl had 4 tackles. Hudson had 3 tackles, as did Mayo. St. Juste had 3 tackles and 3 passes defense. Very good. Ridgway, 3 tackles. Butler, 3 tackles and a pass defense. And the rookie Emmanuel Forbes had 3 tackles and 2 passes defense. Moving on to the New England Patriots. Mac Jones, 24-44, 220 yards, touchdown, 1 interception, quarterback rating of 66.5. Leading rusher was Ramondre Stevenson, 9 rushes, 87 yards, and a touchdown. Stevenson also had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 42. Ezekiel Elliott held to 17 yards on 6 rushes. Okay, Demario Douglas led the Patriot receivers, 5 catches, 55 yards on 7 targets, averaged 11 yards a catch. Juju Smith-Schuster, 6 catches, 51 yards on 7 targets, 8.5 yards average. Talked about Stevenson already. Hunter Henry, 4 catches, 39 yards, and a touchdown on 7 targets, averaged 9.8. Zeke had 3 catches for 15 yards on 5 per catch. And Jalen Reagor, 1 catch, 11 yards on 6 targets. Okay. Ryland, 1 for 1 on field goals, 2 for 2 on extra points. Behringer, 6 punts, 54.5 yard average. Longest was 60 with 1 touchback and 2 punts inside the 20-yard line. Juwan Bentley led the Patriots defense with 10 tackles and 2 sacks. Bryant, 6 tackles. Kyle Duggar, 4 tackles, a pass defense interception. Mapu, 4 tackles. Gottschall, 3 tackles. Wise, 3 tackles and a sack. Peppers, 3 tackles and 2 passes defensed. Jones, 3 tackles and a pass defense. There's a Jonathan Jones and a Jack Jones. They both had 3 tackles. I think this is Jack Jones that had the pass defense. Sorry, my computer is slow today. My computer is real slow because I think the man I clicked on is Jones, but it's not telling. Okay, there's this picture. Okay, where's everything else? Killing me with this. Okay, that was Jonathan Jones. Jonathan Jones had the 3 tackles and defense. Jack Jones had the 3 tackles by himself. And then Tavai had 2 tackles and a forced fumble. Gotcha. All right. Moving on to team numbers now. Total yards, 432 for Washington, 327 for New England. Passing yards, 308 for the Commanders, 220 for the Patriots. Rushing yards is 124 for the Commanders and 107 for the Patriots. First downs were 23-18 in favor of Washington. The Commanders finished 9 of 17 on 3rd down, 0 for 0 on 4th down. And the Patriots, 3 of 12 on 3rd down, 1 for 2 on 4th down. Scroll to the bottom. There you go. Okay. Each team had 4 penalties for 30 yards. Washington suffered 3 sacks, losing 17 yards, with 1 lost fumble, 1 interception, and 5 punts. Meanwhile, the Patriots had 0 sacks sustained, with no lost fumbles, 1 interception, and 6 punts. Closing line is England -3, and the over-under is at 40.5. I picked Patriots to win and to cover. I'm kind of questioning that decision. Sorry, Mitch, but I am kind of questioning that decision. Okay, that is it for part 1, week 9 edition of the week that was. We took a look at the Thursday night game, the Frankfurt game, and the Sunday afternoon games in the early window. Stick around for part 2, where we'll be discussing the 4 p.m. games, Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football, plus my Week 10 power rankings, the updated standings, and playoff races entering Week 10. That's coming up in part 2, so join me for that. In the meantime, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell and get notified every time I go live. Big Al signing off. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the pigskin. Peace out.